first of all, welcome to Interintellect. My name is Anna Gát. I will be your host today. Really, my job here is to kind of melt into the background very soon and just like leave the room to these two incredible professors, Hollis Robbins and Anastasia Berg. You probably have read a little bit by them. Some of their pieces were in the description in the event. Hollis is the humanities dean of America, one of the greatest public intellectuals. If you read her anecdotal value Substack, with a lot of very edgy and contrarian ideas about the whole thing. I don't know what the other humanities people are thinking about this. I hope we will soon find out. And Anastasia, I think this is your second time on Interintellect. Your incredible book with Rachel Wiseman basically rewrote the liberal script for how to think about having or not having children in America. Yeah, thank you for your service. And you're also are having babies. So we know that this is something where it is actually a family project. And your latest kind of public worry has been the adoption of AI amongst your students at UC Irvine. And we're talking about humanities professors here. So literary history, literature, poetry, philosophy, public philosophy, argumentation, rhetoric. So the parts of human knowledge and cognition that are like to be automated in a very different way from when you're feeding your budget into O3. And so my sense here, and I'm in a second going to just like give the floor to first Hollis and Anastasia to make their cases and argue for their own sides. We're talking about automating potentially something that many humans think of as kind of the core values of the human mind or the human intellect. We will challenge this from multiple angles. For instance, maybe at some point, Excel sheets counted as core values in the human intellect, and now you're happy if you don't have to do it, most of us. And I'm sure that the room will have both plenty of arguments on both sides. So thank you so much for being here. And Hollis, the floor will be yours. So tell us, you're arguing on the side of a positive scenario where AI actually makes academic life better, more efficient, cheaper, more egalitarian, and somehow humans smarter. What do you have in mind when you're writing these very hopeful things on your side?
Well, first of all, thank you, and I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be having this conversation. And so this is fantastic. Anastasia, am I pronouncing your name right, by the way, Anastasia?
It's fine. I say Anastasia, but I respond
Anastasia.
to
Okay, it's all
everything.
good. No, I want to make sure this is right. The human touch, as you say. I mean, we had a little bit of back and forth because, in fact, we have a lot of agreement about the human touch, about that sort of last mile, as I've written about, of what AI can do and what it can't do in terms of our human flourishing. But in order to make this more of a debate, I'll just say that what I bring to the table, or what my proposal would be, is that within 2 years, I think AI will be delivering the general education curriculum for all public universities. And what I mean by that is that the sort of layer of general education, which includes writing, critical thinking, some of the baseline that most state mandates have decided is going to be a requirement for, all college students in public universities around the country. This is delivering information that is already known, and it's being delivered by a human professor in a classroom, usually an overworked grad student, an overworked underpaid adjunct. I have spent the last 7 years at Dean's at 2 different places reading course evaluations, and it is not being done well. So when I say, what is it that AI can bring to higher education, let's start with the baseline of, are we doing a good job right now, human to human, teaching writing, teaching literature, teaching math, teaching critical thinking, teaching intro to philosophy? And, I ran into a young woman when I had a flat tire. I had to bring my car into the garage, and there's a young woman at the counter, and I knew she was a student at the University of Utah. And I said, or, she had something that she was wearing. I said, "Are you a student?" She said, "Yes, I'm taking a year off because I'm in debt." And I said, "Oh, like where are you in your journey, in your process?" And she said, "Oh, I've just taken my general education." I said, "Well, how do you feel about being in debt $8,000 for your general education. She said it was a complete waste of time. I've learned everything. It didn't teach me anything that I didn't know. I was expecting to go to university and have strong, good relationships with professors, to work with experts. She's like going to be a neuroscientist. She wanted to take classes already that are getting her toward neuroscience. And it was just this layer of information and box checking. So I was going to ask any of you when we get to the question or opening things up, if you know much about the general education. I see some smiles here. So my sort of proposal is to say, I think AI has to be part of a university education. If states are going to mandate taking money for what is already known, AI would be much better at delivering this. And we could talk a little bit about why, but I'll stop there so we can at least start our conversation.
It's so interesting to me, by the way, as I was preparing for this event, it kind of struck me that at the core of your disagreement, as it seems to me, is, Hollis, from your side, this really, really deep question that is somewhat political, somewhat about the economy. What is the value of college education in the age of AI? Like, it
Correct.
seems like suddenly, if anything, this question is up for debate.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Anastasia, as we were putting together the reading list, and we were talking about putting up the event and how we would frame it, to me, it seems like your question is more like, what is human thinking in the age of AI? And from then on, you basically have to reverse engineer from your question the core question, which is, what is human thinking? And when you ask that question, you are at the birthplace of philosophy. Because then you have to ask what is human, and a lot of things get very uncomfortable. So I know you, I love you. You are very comfortable with uncomfortable questions. How should we think about it? And where does one even get started when dealing with the technology that brings up such deep existential questions about who we are?
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Interintellect, for this chance to think through a very urgent issue. It's on my mind all the time. It's a perfect interlocutor that I have received from you. So Hollis Robbins, who's an expert both in kind of the cutting edge of AI and education. It's a perfect setting, which is an Interintellect debate hosted by its brilliant founder, Anna. So thank you, first of all. Now, my time is brief, as we agreed, but I'm happy to say my argument is very simple. And what I want to claim and convince you of is that any purported use or alleged benefit of the introduction of AI into university, so that includes the possibility that it could somehow make general education perhaps more effective or cheaper, it needs to be really carefully weighed against what I think is already the undeniable cost of AI use, especially by students. And I'm going to put it a little bit provocatively by saying that cost, or the main cost for me, it's rendering our students subcognitive. And yes, I am trying to make subcognitive happen, but I'm going to try and convince you of why that is the case.
Subcognitive, sorry to interrupt. Subcognitive, just to does that mean dumb?
So let me explain. I'll say a little bit more exactly about what I mean.
I want to understand if you're being realistic.
It doesn't mean smart, but it doesn't mean just dumb. So let me say what exactly I mean. So, and I'll get to that in a second, but I want to really emphasize first, because once I say this, it gets really controversial when we want to talk about the subcognition bit. I just want to say that this argument, just to emphasize the structure, it's not going to turn on denying any and all possible uses of AI in an academic setting. It's not going to even turn on the idea that none of them can maybe even produce like a marginally better result when we view how a particular kind of like question operates within STEM, and is it better to have a private tutor that's an AI that's very rigged and guardrailed, or a private person? I want to always, this is my claim, I think we always have to be doing this weighing. Parenthetically, I am, as a matter of fact, skeptical about some of these purported uses and benefits and successes. I don't think they often actually hold up to scrutiny. But my argument is that whatever these benefits may be, they need to outweigh that cost. And they need to be do so by a comfortable margin. Because this cost, and this is this kind of the second key claim I want to make, it's not what we hear. It's not academic integrity. It's not pedagogical quality. It's not some vague and bespoke and kind of sentimentally conceived humanistic value. Important as all these might be, and they certainly are to me, I'm a philosophy professor. And just to kind of piggyback and making it a little bit more feisty with Hollis, I'm actually not talking about the special human touch, and I'm not talking about the last mile. The cost of relying on AI is a degradation of as kind of co-thinkers and humans, most basic, fundamental, non-artisanal, non-recherche, non-specialized cognitive capacities. Using AI to perform intellectual tasks is destroying our students. And it's already happening now as we have the first generation of students who are having kind of full years of their college education and more than one now being completely infiltrated with AI. So I want us to be clear about what I mean when I say destroying our students' capacity to think. I'm talking about the capacity to take in information. And I'm not talking about just complex information. I'm talking basic information. I'm talking about being able to understand what words mean. I'm talking about being able to understand what sentences mean individually and taken together. It's about assessing the significance of that information, drawing conclusions from it, communicating our thoughts. So these are our beliefs, also our worries and our questions, effectively, persuasively, but even just coherently to others. And that's what I think is at stake right now. A recent MIT, I'm sure everyone who's interested enough to come to this debate has seen the reports on the recent MIT Media Lab study that show that the use of LLMs in the composition of essays degraded essay writing capacities. When researchers forced ChatGPT users to then write without AI after kind of prompting them multiple times to write essays with AI, they performed worse than people who never used it. And they performed worse than their counterparts at all levels, so neural, linguistic, and scoring. I think one of the most kind of shocking bits of reporting are that 83% of ChatGPT users couldn't quote from the essays they wrote minutes earlier. And likewise, we have a study, which I actually think is sort of as interesting and as important because it goes even more towards this question of the potential benefits in things like gen ed. We have a study at the University of Pennsylvania studying the effects of the use of AI math tutoring at the high school level. We're sort of artificially separating university from high school, but this is somewhat of an artificial separation. They found that access to GPT-4 led students to perform significantly worse when access was taken away. And while a GPT tutor, so something with guardrails and teacher manufactured prompts, didn't harm students, it didn't help them either, and it did affect their sense of learning significantly. Namely, it seeded a lot of false confidence. So they were certain they know a lot more than the students who didn't have access to that AI tutor, which I think is sort of, from an educational, pedagogical perspective, is a danger of its own. And I want to conclude by saying this hard empirical evidence that's coming out, it's a completely nascent field. It begins to establish that reliance on AI will not just harm capacities for some in-depth analysis or creativity or adaptability, as many have argued, is going to degrade that most basic capacity that it's trying directly to enhance. And the last thing I want to say is, as significant as empirical studies might be, I want to end on the student testimonies, because these are the things that really have haunted me. We've now had students who have used AI for so long in their studies that they can reflect on that experience. And I'm just going to share with you two quotes that I found personally heartbreaking. One student said to a Chronicle reporter, so a Chronicle of Higher Education, "I've become lazier. AI slowly causes my brain to lose the ability to think critically or understand every word." And that's really important, because thinking critically can sound like something very complicated, but he's talking about understanding the meaning of every word that he's reading, or she, and then using, and the possibility of using AI to produce summaries. Another says, "Sometimes I don't even understand what the text is trying to tell me." So, yes, this is an assault on our very humanity, as a lot of people say, but this isn't a statement about risk to, again, some special value or some like very kind of romantic way of looking at ourselves. It's a statement that's meant to convey that AI, and now to your question, Anna, it's making students dumber and it's making them cruder. And even if it makes their life longer by improving the results of kind of radiology analyses, it's going to make them nastier and more brutish. And if this is not enough, I want us to not forget that what's at stake here, this humanity, is the foundation of our most basic ethical and political convictions. Subcognitive beings do not require us to treat them with respect. And more alarmingly, subcognitive beings aren't fit for self-rule. They're not fit to make decisions about their own private lives. People who don't understand words and sentences and can't read a short passage from the newspaper, I think we can credibly start questioning the thought that they should be allowed to make decisions about their own private lives. But there certainly shouldn't be making decisions about our collective decisions and our shared experience. So they might not be fit for democracy. And that's where I'll end.
Awesome.
Thank you
Do you
so
want me
much,
to, I have a
Hollis.
couple of things. Yeah, no, first of all, I mean, I'm so glad you sort of so nicely put the
Thank
stakes.
you for the two intros. I mean, these were
That's
fascinating.
just fantastic. Well, I mean, my first thought was actually going back to 1635 and around the time of the founding of Harvard. There wasn't any books, right? So if you read up about the Harvard blank books, right, that if you went to Harvard in the 1630s, 40s, 50s, actually right up until the turn of the century, when your professor assigned a book, it meant you had to write it down. Right, that you actually had to write down Principia Mathematica, Secundia, Liber Secundia, like all the physics books, all the geography books, all the Latin books, you had to write them down. And so after a little while, you know, as Harvard got a little more flush and they actually got books, the complaint was exactly the complaint that you just made. Like, how? You mean the students are just going to have to read it? They're not going to have to write down the whole book? They're just going to sit and read it? How are they going to learn? How is that going to have a habit of mind? Like to have us to understand that complaint is a technological complaint, that students can actually then get an education simply by taking it in and not by actually by hand. And so you can go to the Harvard blank books and you could go to Harvard Library and just see copies that the students had made all of these years. So I bring that up just to say that we have had this conversation about a new technology. The second one is that study was deeply, deeply flawed. I had a tweet about it. Other people have seen about this. So I'm going to say that I think the study, there was methodologically flawed and technologically flawed. It was unclear what was being measured. So I just want to put that, we could debate that or not.
Do you mind saying a little bit more? I read both your piece on it or your tweet thread, and I think there was also a piece in the Free Press about it. But do you maybe want to just say a few words for those here who might not?
Well, just if you looked at the study that the people who started doing AI and that started doing some projects with AI, and then the other ones that weren't not having used AI, the EEG could be measuring a million things, and it was not necessarily measuring the thing that the study said that it was measuring. And I think, just as a matter of methodology and a matter of the experimental design, it was designed to meet everybody's priors, and it did. And that's part of why I thought that it was not a good study for a certain kind of distance from the question. But back to this question, and I get the point, Anastasia, about subcognitive, and I think that's a good phrase. Again, I think the question is, and I come from this as a dean or as former dean or as somebody who's been making policy, right? That I look at this level of what happens in the classroom at many universities where I have been and seen that interaction between faculty and students or between, student and student is not always the healthiest or the best or the most productive relationship in terms of instilling habits of mind. And so when I think about what AI can do, or an engagement with AI that can elicit I've spent more time with on AI platforms than others. I think about the ways that it has elicited things from me that have never been elicited from me in terms of thoughts and ideas. Somebody I think you were there, Anna, at the last conference had said that there was that working with a really good model of AI is like browsing the stacks in a really good library. Things will come to you. And again, I'm talking strictly about the pro models. So what I would say is, again, I'm not disagreeing with you that there is a certain, my entire life is, reading, grappling with words and thoughts and ideas and concepts and all those things is really, really important. But it's not happening now. It's not happening now.
Can I just insert something here? Because I think there seems to be something here that, to my ears, a little bit precedes the adoption of AI tools. And I'm just going to leave this here with you, and you take it wherever you want. And two different things. One is, and I'm trying to read literally everything that comes my way all day long, always looking for new ideas, always looking for more events, hosts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I have a kind of digest overview of the press. And there seems to be a fad, especially in the elite media in America, to be extremely skeptical of AI and write about it like the devil has arrived to Moscow and now we're all right. And there's never a silver lining. And usually, it's from people who are users of technology writing on probably MacBooks and on their phones, and then publishing it on the internet as well. So you have this kind of ambivalence. And this is coming for the AI tools as well, from the criticism of the companies that are making the AI, often more doomerism than there would be in the industry, and immediate denouncement of all cognitive and other effects that there might be. On the other hand, I spend my life amongst intellectuals, and many, many of you are academics, or at least have an academic praxis. And it has been an kind of zero division opinion for the past, say, 10 years that there has been a cognitive decline amongst your students. So every teacher, even the most pro-tech professors, will tell you that the texts have to be shorter, that students don't understand the words. I've been hearing this thing of people not understanding words for a very long time. There seems to be some kind of rearrangement of literacy. And some people think it's because of TikTok. Some people think it's because of Netflix, because of drugs, because of fluoride in the water. I don't know. Everybody has an idea why this is happening. And now we are including AI into this criticism, but I think it's important to signal that this didn't even start with with smartphones. This started at some point when I was young. It was that video games cause school
started in 1635 with the blank book.
Yes. So I'm really curious. I happen to think that AI is a new type of technology, and we can assign new things to it, and it's okay to talk about it in a more kind of existentialist way. But I always try to be critical of myself as well, because I sometimes think the same thing about AI that I would have thought. As an employer, I see it. I have had freelancers 2 years ago who didn't understand the contract. English native speakers. 10 years ago, I didn't have that problem. So now
I'm hearing Anastasia about to jump in.
Yeah. Sorry. So just as a kind of parenthesis here.
So actually, this doesn't start in 1635. The earliest, or I don't know if the earliest, but one early articulation of the fear about technology in the written word comes in about the 4th century BC with Plato's Phaedrus.
Yes.
Now, let me say something about Harvard. So when I was at Harvard, we had books. And we said the worry with the books was that we're simply taking it in. But actually, I didn't simply take anything in, because I have to constantly not just take in things, but I had to get things out. And those things were essays. And the environment, the circumstances in which I was having to submit said essays was one in which there was a both institutional but also perceived, because made public, zero tolerance for any kind of even the mildest transgression against standards of academic integrity. And so that meant that in that environment, despite many incentives to not do my work, I was forced again and again and again to write my essays, even though I had real books that I didn't copy by longhand. When we're talking about what is happening right now in my classrooms, is not that students are simply taking it in, but that then when they are required to submit their own work, they're submitting the work of someone else. So that's simply taking it. They're not even simply taking it in. They don't need to take anything in. The only thing they need to take in is to take the prompt for our assignments in for once the second that it takes to take it in and to copy paste it into the LLM. So I find the comparison, which we see everywhere, to books, to the calculator, to Wikipedia, to be nothing short. And I'm so sorry. And I'm so grateful to be here and I respect you, Hollis, but that is sophistry. It's sophistry to compare the use of LLMs to these other technologies, not because the other technologies did not also come at cost. Again, I'm open. There are many benefits to the use of AI, maybe even in education. But when we were able to evaluate those costs and benefits, we weren't faced with anything like what's happening today. And that is because, and I think Anna kind of hinted at part of it, one thing that's unique about AI is that not even like the degraded source that was a Wikipedia article, none of these sources, not a calculator, not a book, and not even a Wikipedia article or Stanford Encyclopedia article for the Stanford Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Philosophy that our students think is a adequate resource. None of them will supply you with. No, it's a great place to start, Anna, but none of them will supply you with a ready-made structured response to any question, including my request to reflect on their personal experience. And it won't supply that ready-made. So even with Wikipedia, the students still had to, in order to do well, in order for me to be able to say anything but, well, okay, this is just some summary. They had to take it in, they had to analyze, and then they had to bring themselves into the work. You have expressed doubt about that study, and we're familiar with those doubts. The sample size was very small, and there are different. Is this an argument more about AI or about cheating? Okay, I'm going to ignore the chat. This is an argument. As I said, my claim is that every introduction of AI into our universities needs to take very seriously the cost. The cost, I'm going to just close this. The cost is the effect it's having on our students. Now, Anna, Hollis, excuse me, you said something about the study. You said the study is not perfect. I am surprised that an educator, no matter what the flaws of the study are, doesn't or educate me. Like, isn't it intuitive that by not performing a task, we will not get better at performing the task and we will score worse. We will be performing that task worse than those people who have been performing the task again and again and again. So, I'm open to arguments about specialized application and those kind of discussions. But the thought that what we want to attack is the MIT study that just said students who never write essays will not get better at writing essays, I find that surprising.
Well, I didn't bring it up, but I just said that it wasn't. I think it was flawed. But here's the question, and let me just say, because you're at Irvine, okay, the first 2 years of the Gen Ed program of students before they get to you or before they even get to your classes, they're taking general education classes that you are not teaching, right?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I do teach general education classes.
Wait, which one? Which ones do you teach?
The philosophy department at the University of California at Irvine teaches many of the humanities.
So when you land there, the Cal GETC that was just passed by AB.
And cannot be replaced by an AI.
Well, I'm just saying, if you take this suite of Gen Ed courses, you can take them at a community college, you could take them at the Cal State, the state has already said that they're exactly the same and that the professor does not matter. Okay, the state of California that pays your salary has already said this, right? That these classes, that the faculty member who is teaching these classes does not matter for the transferability of these classes across institutions. Now, that is the baseline. I know that we're talking about two different things because I agree with you. Like you are articulating the ideal, the platonic ideal of a classroom situation of a student who really wants to grapple with texts and is being asked to write wonderful essays. That is not happening in public higher ed, at least. And so when I'm sitting here saying that AI could be having some engagements with students, I am saying that I'm working in a state that we've got states like Texas and others that are saying none of this matters, we just have to train you for the workforce, and states like California that says the faculty member does not even matter. So that is the context in which I am saying yes, that AI has a role.
So when we're talking about gen ed education in the humanities, I have not seen, unlike possible applications in math and STEM more generally, I have not seen anything that an AI interacting with my students can do to replace the benefit that a student has from being, and I'm going to allow myself this kind of locution, but forced by the structure of incentives at a university to grapple with text of a certain length and complexity. And despite whatever it is that we're talking about, we're saying about the replaceability and what you're saying, Hollis, my students, until the introduction of AI, were required in my classes to write 2 essays. Those essays were read and remarked upon by very thoughtful, wonderful graduate students of mine and myself. Those students came to my class and we discussed the material. From my very close engagement in an environment in which I'm encouraged to try and find ways of both incorporating AI and replacing myself, I have not found any way that will even sort of remotely suggest that any of this work could be transferred to AI. So one of the things that I am most surprised about is the kind of confidence that gen ed in humanities can be performed by AI. And I guess that's just an invitation to say more about how you think that is going to happen.
I want to hear from others, but let me just say right now, when you are a student,
yeah, but you're debating me.
The Cal State system, no, is that you enter the system and you have to take all these credits in critical thinking, right? Particularly, let's just stick with that because that's one that philosophy, also English, you can pass it in these ways, right? And in a large 40-person class without TAs, with a faculty member who's teaching 45 sections of this class, you're not going to have the personalized feedback that you're just talking about. So when I'm talking about AI intervention, again, I'm just talking about in places where it's currently being delivered in a place where the student isn't getting feedback.
Let me say something about feedback because I think I have something to contribute. So part of my delinquent college career involved the fact that I mean, I must have read the instructor comments, but I don't remember any of them. And I don't think that anything that any TA or professor, except with the exception of one, Helen Wendler, may she rest in peace, has ever made any difference to my capacity to grow intellectually. But somehow at the end of that college career, I got into a grad program of my choice. So how did that happen? That happened not because of the personalized comments I got. It happened because I had to perform that task again and again and again. And I was doing it in an environment. I was also getting some feedback. I mean, had to take it in. But I mostly was doing it in a context where I was also just constantly reading. So I was reading and writing, reading and writing. And in that context, I ended up improving. Maybe the encouragement of a human being probably played a role. There was tremendous role to my intellectual development that was played by kind of individual, what you would call the human touch components. So we agree on that, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I really want to talk about the repetition of the task of producing these assignments. And so, yeah, I would just maybe
Well,
it's
let me just
anecdotal. We need
say,
to we
yeah.
need to look into the empirical research on it. But my guess is that if you take a student, and I have, for instance, I have even friends who are in the kind of the utopian system of an Oxbridge tutorial system where they're getting that one-on-one contact, and even then, it is not the particular comments about how you mistook what Burke said here or how that word was misplaced there that made the big difference. I mean, it's embarrassing to be called out on a grammar typo, but it was really this necessity of reading and writing and reading and writing and reading and
Sure.
writing that then matures our students to a place where they can really
Absolutely.
be intellectual interlocutors to us.
Well, I'm 100% in agreement with you on that. I'm just saying when a
I know.
state system does not have the money, right, to have that kind of attention, it does not. And the students, and again, you're an exceptional
But
student,
this
right?
doesn't require this
Wait,
doesn't
hang on.
require
Look,
any
you're an
attention.
exceptional student, right? We've got students who phone it in, who don't want to be there, who don't want to be in their classes, who are required to take these classes, who put their prompt in, and there's no disciplinary structure to make somebody do something over and over again that they do not want to do. So it is easy. It is easy for anybody to teach the exceptional student, right? The bored, harried, overworked, doesn't want to be their student, teaching that student is the challenge. And it's certainly the challenge in a public institution. And when I was talking about the young woman that I saw when I was getting my tire trained, she didn't want to take any of those classes. I didn't ask her explicitly whether she had, done her AI. I kind of suspect she had because she had better things to do with her time. So I'm dealing with the sort of reality of a situation and I get it. I totally agree with you that clearly you and Helen Vedler and all of you did it because you were self-motivated. Many students aren't.
No, it wasn't. But I want to separate two things. One is the structure of gen ed education. And in many places, including here, but hopefully no one is hearing me, it's deeply flawed. And so we can have a conversation about what would an ideal gen ed education environment look like? Or in particular, what kind of content would it have? I am a firm believer, however, that we need to have general education and what it differentiates the American system, what gives it the title of liberal arts as opposed to kind of specialized European style education system, where really once you graduate high school, you don't need to ever study anything unless you're quote unquote kind of internally motivated. But what you've chosen, and it could be even a vocational training, even for our kind of best and brightest. So I want to separate that question from what you're raising, Hollis, which is this idea that there is no way for us to administer quote unquote gen ed education at cost. Now, if we're comparing the cost of firing all gen educations and giving them chat GPT, I don't know if I can compete with that, especially because right now it's all subsidized by the actual AI companies. So I can't compete with that, but I can say the following. And I see this because that's what I'm struggling with as I'm thinking about how to design my classes and what my colleagues are struggling with as we teach. We happen to teach a lot of gen ed classes here. There are ways of having assessment structures that are not open to the use of AI. We all know them. They include in-class assignments, they include peer review, but I also want to talk about they include also an emphasis on providing our students with opportunities to be tech-free. And my students, Hollis, a lot of them are STEM students that are very reluctant to talk about contemporary moral problems. So I'm very familiar with that. Creating environments for them for tech-free engagement, using our time for discussion sections to actually do that kind of work of writing and thinking that we're not doing, that we're not kind of thinking that the incentive structures allow them to do by themselves at home. What I would want, because Anna also said we want to be concrete, we want to be talking to the future. If we were spending, at least in the context of the UC system, and I know this reflects more broadly, if we were spending a fraction of our resources, the time and money and personnel resources to think together about how to protect our students from the absolutely degrading effects of their constant use of the technology, as opposed to sending them daily emails, encouraging them to use models that I and my students have access to that are paid only and are subsidized by my university, I think we would be at least striking a middle ground between the pessimism of we have nothing to offer these people except AI access and kind of what I don't really accept is some fantasy in which I think that all public education could be done by like an Oxbridge tutorial system.
It's really interesting. Like at my university in Budapest, like where I did my first 2 degrees, we had like really old-fashioned oral exams where you would go, you would pick an envelope from the in front of the professor, and then you would have to sit down, write it there in front of him or her, and then present it to the class. And I think all of everybody in my class became quite good public speakers. It didn't do us any harm, and there's no way you can cheat there. We will talk a little bit more about cheating. I would like to go to Jen for a second, another Dean of Humanities from the University of Tulsa. And then Wes, if you want to jump in, you also had a question. I will give you some time as well. Hi, Jen.
Hey,
Welcome back to Interintellect. How are
sorry, I'm
you
trying to
doing?
get my
Hi.
hi,
Hey, how are you?
I got stuck in New York City and I just got out of the shower. But anyway,
Hi. So sad I couldn't see you at the Heterodox conference. I had
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
go.
Um, so I guess I mean I've been in administration for 2 years now, and prior to being at the University of Tulsa, I've been at large state flagship schools and in fact went to a large state flagship school as an undergrad. So it's a space that I understand exceedingly well from both sides. And I think the thing that really bothers me in like a deep existential way is um, the ways that the administrative class, which is my people, um, just like to double down on failure. Um, and so it's kind of like, oh, we all know Gen Ed's a failure. Rather than fix that, which we could do, we could absolutely do it. Let's just, hand them over to the robots. And it's like, to me, it's negligence. Um, and and I I I just am very bothered by it. You know, I general education is for most of our students today the only chance they have at anything remotely like a liberal education. And a liberal education isn't worth a damn if it's not actually a kind of formation, if it's not forming habits of mind, habits of speech, habits of being. Um, and so I think the argument really has to come down to whether or not you think those habits need to be formed in a human context, or whether you think it could sort of be outsourced to increasingly non-human like, right? Like AI super intelligence is not human like, right? Maybe Chat GPT is, but what's on the horizon isn't. And I think um what I would really like to see, because all of this is happening so much more quickly than higher education like has any capacity to deal with, which is like very terrifying. It's actually happening faster than like any of us can deal with, but that's like a separate conversation. But I think, I mean, for me, the thing that we always have to be fighting for is this idea that one, general education is actually extremely important. And not just like a weird side thing that for some reason is there and no one can figure out why. And two, that we really have to take seriously that it's a kind of formation and thinking about what are those practices in the classroom that actually lead to the formation of these habits. And habit is something I've literally spent my entire career thinking about. And you just don't get habits without the activities, right? And I don't really think that AI is a very good substitute for a dialectical partner. Um, so,
So I'd
but
like to begin to say I agree with everything you're saying, except the fact that we have no baseline for whether the human teachers, I mean, there are no studies of well, who is an instructor or not. And one of the things that one gets from being a dean is reading everybody's course evaluations and seeing trends over time of who the great teachers are, who the ones aren't, where teaching is happening, where habits of mind are being produced, and where they're not. And again, if everybody was as awesome as you, or as awesome as you, Anastasia, or as awesome as I am, won several teaching awards, then I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. But I know really well, and I'm not just complaining, it's bad. But one of the ways that to quote unquote fix things is at least have a baseline, right? A baseline of what that engagement is. And I'm telling you that what I've seen is that a really good pro model is not as good as the best professor at all, but is a lot better than most.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. I'll give you the floor, and then we will go to Wes as well.
But I know that Hollis jumped into Jen, and I want to make sure Jen, is that okay, Anna? Jen, you're good.
Yeah.
I do want to say, so look, I take
I'll go
seriously
back to you, Jen, after Anastasia. Okay.
I take seriously what students have to say, partly because we have to take their motivation and engagement into account, because a completely reluctant student is not one we're going to teach. However, I think that the kind of reliance that Hollis, you've mentioned student evaluations before, you're mentioning them again, you're mentioning teaching awards that are, insofar as they're based in student evaluations. I think we have to be careful about that reliance as we're thinking about the quality of instruction. So one of the things that's come up and made the viral rounds was one of the a professor who was talking about the use of AI, and they've tried to AI proof an assignment. And there was a quote by a student who responded by saying, "You're interfering with my learning style." I know, Anna. So interfering with our learning styles. Now, that's not going to be a student who's going to leave a good student evaluation. Does that suggest that that instructor is any worse? My partner, who's my colleague here, got in student evaluation. He's a great teacher, and he got student evaluations, and they're good. But he immediately, and it was natural, both remarked that the fact that he had forced students to perform AI-proof assignments had effect on how the student responses, and it was just what they were saying. But to make it a little bit more concrete and scientific, we know that it could not just when it comes to the use of AI, but in general in educational experiences, students often confuse basically like entertainment and ease value for learning. So when we measure their performance, we will see, and then their own evaluation of their performance, they will rank higher their own performance, predict better, having absorbed more material, being able to do more at the end of a course if they had more fun, if a professor was more entertaining, and if it was easier for them to do. Those evaluations of their own kind of learning objectives are dissociated from reality. So I also feel, but people here have more experience than I do with students. I also just know that students are becoming, the perception of themselves as consumers, their own expectations of being entertained, their own expectations of being able to do the work with a certain kind of ease. They're all going into what you're reporting on as their student evaluations. Now, I don't know. In some context, maybe a robot is better than the absolutely worst professor. But I want us to hold that information about student evaluation squarely in mind as we come to evaluate. And then I also just want to say one more thing, and then I'll stop. We're talking about education, and education is a very intricate and complicated and subtle thing. But there's something about it that's also incredibly simple. It's giving students, at least in the context of my own humanistic, what I'm trying to do, and they're kind of limited to that gen ed class, I'm trying to give an opportunity to read a text they might otherwise not do. It is longer than what they might read by themselves. It is more complicated than what they would persevere with. And I want them to ask themselves questions, forcing themselves to attend to that text, i.e., recognizes the functions of the argument. I'm hearing people today already tell me a student can't tell what's an example and what's a claim and what's an objection. They're just reading everything as a mass. And I want to give an opportunity to do that. And we work so hard to give him that opportunity. We do our pedagogy workshops, and I give him a lecture, and I give him homework, but that's what we're talking about. Make them read, make them think, and then make them communicate that to someone else. And I just have not seen, and I know there's various kind of skepticism in the chat, and I want to hear more, but I really have not seen how it is that an LLM is going to be able to replace or do anything when we're talking about that, providing that opportunity, that incentive structure that makes somebody do, to go back to what Jen was saying, and the habit formation, something that is not fun and doesn't feel good and is not entertaining in the moment, and whose benefit they may theoretically take in but are not feeling, and they prefer to do absolutely everything else, not just because they're TikTok addicts, although half of them are, but also because they have so many pressures, vocationals, financial, social, that they would rather attend to instead. And I just have not seen any reason to think that it's the AI that can help us replace that.
Thank you so much. And Jen, I'm going to give you back the mic because they responded to you. So I think that's only fair.
Well, it just what Anastasia was saying just reminded me of another kind of pain point for me, and that is that we tend to think of students as these like isolated learning units, as if the classroom, you know, shouldn't ideally be a space of community, right? Where like what we're trying to do is have students learn from one another. At least that's what I'm always trying to do. Maybe if I taught calculus, I would feel differently, although I'm not sure that I would. And so for me, part of the existential threat of AI is that we're taking the communal element out of it. Um, and, you know, I think that that pairs really well with this kind of instrumentalization of general education, where it's something you have to go to for some reason that nobody ever really explains. None of it makes sense. It's like, why do I have to do this? And it's like, okay, you just have to jump through these hoops. Here's a robot to help you. To me, again, it's doubling down on failure rather than looking the problem square in the face, which is that general education in most of our universities is a joke and we need to fix it.
Thank you so much. I mean, on Interintellect, we actually make paying customers read really difficult text, and as a kind of counterintuitive, refutation of the "I'm here to be entertained" mindset that many professors report about their students recently, is, people pay to come to salons, and it's because they have paid that they will read the texts, because without that, they would not have as much enjoyment and entertainment during the conversation. Like, you're not going to pay $40 to go to a salon with somebody you have no idea. I mean, very few people would, some definitely would. But I also found, I mean, I've been running this company for 6 years, and I think I just hosted my 1000th salon, that the joy of learning is so correlated not just with the relationship with the host or whoever the authority figure responsible for the group is, which in a university setting is the professor, but we want to show off to each other. Like, I learn a new word and I want to use it in a sentence immediately. There is some kind of competition and cooperation in the room, whether that's really like learning from another person who has a different perspective, a different experience. All of us alive in the world know something that nobody else knows, right? And it's worth sharing it. But there's also the little bit of cockiness to it. Like, we want to shine with, and whilst we are doing these social rituals, we actually internalize what we have learned. I have very low incentive to wow my AI. It's like, well, I pay for it and it's probably going to pander to me whatever happens. Although it's very useful to use it to tell you how you're wrong. I really recommend that. Wes, you've been waiting. Thank you so much for your patience from MIT, so we can have a more we can
That's right.
have a
Actually,
more
from the
straight to
media
the
lab
home
across the
argument there.
hallway from the
What do you
research
think
group
about this
that,
study?
yeah. I have to, so I should probably tread a little carefully here because our research group is actually across the hallway, and I like actually bump into them sometimes. But yeah, I had I had some reservations about that study. But I think there might be some issues with the methodology, but even if you like set that aside, you say that they did everything perfectly. The correct conclusion, I think, from the study is really that if you make people try to sort of assess and like remember something from a thing that they did not write, that they're not going to be very good at that, right? Which is a much less enticing headline than ChatGPT is like rotting your brain, right? So I think it's very like it's very important to be careful about distinguishing between like the use of AI in the activity of like just not doing the work, right? So uh, so, like another way I think about it actually is the use of AI for either consumption or production, right? So if you're using AI to like write all of your essays all the time, then of course you're not going to be a very good essay writer, right? But there are very good, like large, high quality studies on the use of AI for consumption that is showing that it is very good for students. So I posted two of those in chat. These studies are orders of magnitude larger than the one at MIT, right? And they also
That's good to
they're
know.
like
Do you want to
several.
say something about it, just for those who might have missed it in the chat? One was the
Yeah.
Nigerian study,
There's
right?
one from Stanford from last year, and then there's one from the World Bank. These are incredibly large randomized controlled trials. A few caveats. So the Stanford one is about using AI as a co-pilot to teachers. So it's not necessarily that the students have direct access to the AI, but the AI is coaching teachers on how to teach. Um, in the World Bank study, the students I believe do have access to AI. In both of these studies, we're looking at populations that are in the lower distribution of the educational spectrum, right? Like one is a very large population of young children in Nigeria. The other is in California, I think, in like like poorer schools. And in both of these cases, like the positive learning effects on the students were incredibly significant. Like it's not even like it was like marginally an improvement. It's like an entire standard deviation. In the case of the World Bank study, it's like more than a year of learning or something, right? So you just cannot like ignore these sorts of results. But these are for students consuming AI in some way, and it's for basic skills. It's like math and like basic science and stuff, right? Which is very different than like writing papers in a philosophy class, right? So my like general sort of stance here is that it's a bit too reductive to say like one way or the other, like whether or not AI should be in education. Like you have to like kind of have some more nuance here and like consider these cases more carefully, right?
Thank you for that. Those were both excellent studies. I had seen one of them around the web, and I think that the intervention that maybe we can help all of us sort of frame productively is this question again of we've got multiple I don't want to categories or students who come to the table with a certain kind of learning capacity or with a certain kind of skills or education or knows like the four children in a Passover Seder, right? The wise, the wicked, and the one that doesn't even know to ask a question, right? That there are ways that I think both teachers, human teachers, and AI have always been grappling. How do you target both an engagement for the delivery of information, but also the eliciting of information for each one? And again, I think AI, we don't even know ways that it could deliver. And again, the pro bottles are better than most. Eliciting something, asking a question, or having a series of questions back and forth may elicit more interest and engagement than sitting in a classroom. And that is this, one of the ways that I've seen in some of these studies, the large studies that you have seen the movement is because there's an individualized engagement rather than a sort of broadcast engagement.
So just to kind of talk about the study. So the one that's about the tutoring co-pilot, I take not to be irrelevant. I mean, that is certainly an application of AI, and like anything, that's one about which I would ask, how do we compare those costs and benefits? In the case of the AI being a tool that the tutor uses for tutoring, not for, as we've seen some people do, grading or giving comments, which students can find very disrespectful, not for producing the kind of the entire lecture, but so let's put that to the side. As you said, the students had no contact with the AI, which is what I'm talking about. That's not the kind of thing that's going to risk them not being able to understand words anymore. As for the World Bank study in Nigeria, that's not math. It was learning English by, I think, second graders. Now, the capacity of AI with everything to do with learning language, again, we want to bracket different applications. That's why I'm putting, that emphasis on like, how is AI going to help me read a long book? Because it's clear that it can help with things like that language education. And I'm with Jen in thinking that with a language and Anna, that a classroom will mimic many more of the effects of like an immersion and their social pressures to produce the language and perform. But of course, there are many advantages to being able to just go back and forth. That's very different than what Jen was saying about AI being able to be that dialectical interlocutor. So when we bracket, however, being a kind of assistant to a tutor and helping or kind of outperforming rural Nigerian tutors in language instruction, and we're looking at what we're talking about here, which is general education at the university level, I find that I guess I find that it could be something a bit misleading about pointing to these studies and saying they're much bigger than the study that showed that the students are writing worse essays. Now, I agree with you. First of all, I'm very skeptical of neuroscience. Sorry, Leslie, you're right there. But the fact that things light up in the brain for me are no proof of cognitive capacity in themselves. And you're right that the memory effects are as they are. But again, you say yourself, imagine that study run in the way that would satisfy all of us. It would be shocking. It would be a miracle if students, without performing a task, will just become better at it by virtue of like playing with playing with an LM that's claiming to do it for them. And when we're looking at that application, I need the evidence that AI can replace what we're talking about, which is, again, sustained attention to long, complicated, not immediately gratifying texts, the engagement with them, and then communicating about them. Anna said, this is what we do at Interintellect. And as somebody said in the chat, I'm sorry, I don't remember whom, the capacity of an adult to know that that could be good for them is very different from a student's. And the reason that we all know that doing things that are hard might be gratifying is because I think we've all had the opportunity to being forced to do that as students. So we're depriving them not just of the content and the skills, but also of the ability to continue doing it again and again and again as graduating adults.
But am I sensing a strong utilitarian argument here that at the end of the day, and this is a similar argument that might come up in other interpersonal areas, from elderly care to, I don't know, sex robots for men who would otherwise never marry or have a relationship with women for demographic reasons, or when we are old, like, of course, you don't want grandma necessarily to be looked after by a robot if there is somebody available, but there will be people due to demographic reasons in some areas of the world very soon who will not have young people around to help them because everybody will be old. So is there something like that with regard to, but to me, the question that arises then is like, why do university at all if the baseline is so bad? Like when we were talking about people who don't enjoy the class, like, why take this? Like,
well, let me jump in on something that's
why
very
are there classes? Why is it a mandatory?
Well, this is what I mean. Even in California, if you are a person who doesn't know what they want, but you know you want to go to college, or you're first gen and you really don't have a sense of things, one of the first questions are asked is like, do you want to go into science or not? And if you say, well, I'm not really sure, or no, you'll get slotted into easy baby science, right? Which is very like science for non-majors, where you're basically doing the chemistry of the stuff that's under your sink, right? This is because it's self-reported, because you say, and whether you're a thinking adult or what have you at 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, whenever you start college, right? This is you saying this. Now imagine the alternative is you log on to whatever, and you are engaged with a series of questions like, and again, this should be a person doing this. I totally agree, but California is not going to spend the money on that. So you log in and let's say, somebody says like, have you been interested? Like, what do you think about the sun? Or what do you, that a series of conversations can lead to an engagement on, let's say, solar flares and electromagnetic fields. And you could see yourself having a kind of exploration with an AI that this young first gen woman who's, maybe mother works as, whatever, who doesn't know that suddenly she actually has this interest in electromagnetic fields. Wouldn't it be great if human interactions could be able to elicit that from her. We don't have the money. We don't, I mean, to get back to saying things are bad, let's look it in the face and fix it. Look, it's almost always comes down to budget. To say that and there are really wonderful ways to sort of elicit in conversations. There are great studies about it. There are great psychological studies about how to get people to explain what their interests are. I think this is an excellent use case for AI in the California Gen Ed system.
Thank you so much, Hollis. And Tom, I think you were our next victim, so you're getting the mic. And if anybody has a question, there are a lot of comments in the chat. So the easiest way to get our attention is by raising your hand.
Yes, I don't have a proper question, but there's a couple of comments, I guess. I hope that's okay. So I'm a physicist, and so I use AI quite a bit. I'm mixed about it. I think my humanities education would have suffered from the use of AI. So I'm pretty sensitive to I call it the discipline argument, that education is losing the ability essentially to coerce students to perform exercise that in the long run are very useful to them. And I think I definitely agree that that's a fact and that's a huge problem and it's difficult. At the same time, it really depends on how you use it, and I can see it in my research as well, I think. And so on that, what Wesley pointed out, I think is very relevant, the dichotomy between consumption and production. But I think it's even within, for example, consumption, there are different habits that will change the efficiency or the benefit of using it. I agree, for example, with what Anastasia said, that even in terms of consumption, engaging at length with a content, it can be important. And you can see it when you read papers, and even as a grown academics, that engaging with a full paper will give you ID that you are not aware of existed, because you see a diversity of argument. If you use AI to target a specific information from a paper, you might lose these IDs. But at the same time, you can also do that with AI. You can search for specific informations, but you can also ask follow-up questions. You can ask the AI to diversify its answer. And so you can kind of recover that part as well. It's just, you have to have the right habit to do that.
I was going to just say really quick. Oh, you go ahead, Anastasia.
Thanks, Hollis. I just want to say quickly two things. First of all, I'm speaking for both my discipline and my discipline understood a bit more broadly. I do have an undergrad in English literature. I'm in philosophy now, so I am speaking on behalf of the humanities. And this kind of claim of let's really assess cost and benefit really carefully also implies that in cases like science education, I was just reading about the study of the Harvard physics class. And I leave it to people to determine whether or not the AI can perform locally in the ways that the kind of more traditional forms of education do or don't. But I want to say one more thing that kind of from my perspective, which is Hollis described, and I think it's effective. A person who has been kind of who by force of inertia, and we kind of feel maybe it's a bit unjust, will be slotted in a particular education track, where if instead we had assigned them a kind of chemistry engagement with an AI, they could have developed at least a more broad interest, if not then become like a chemistry professor. So first of all, I think it's interesting that the example was science, because I think Hollis is talking about humanities, and I'm not sure how the AI is going to like develop an interest in the student to read novels. But okay, setting that aside, but that's huge because we're talking about gen ed. A lot of times we are talking about how to give for a growing STEM community a taste of the humanities. Where in the context of Interintellect, we're talking about people who are going to be doing serious intellectual work and not wanting to deprive people of that opportunity. So let's notice that example was chemistry. But more importantly, even if we do that, we have to make sure to then educate that student as to the limitations of AI. And that's something that Tom's comment and this whole discussion, I think, really bears out. Tom knows what an AI can and cannot do vis-a-vis a longer argument. He knows how to use it. He knows how misleading it can be. In the math tutoring study from UPenn, one of the biggest problems with the just using it for math tutoring was that it was right 51% of the time. And this is high school math. And this was recent. This isn't some old model. So I want to be able to also equip that student with all the tools to critically evaluate the actual reliability of the tool. So, and to really understand that the fact that somebody has given them a very particular application with very particular prompts and with the answers fed in, that's a very different story than her having then these conversations with an AI more broadly and treating them as reliable. And again, when I look right now at what my students everywhere at this university, which reflects again national situation, are getting, they're getting nothing but encouragement to freely engage with the technology. There is no sense of trying to make them into mature, say, consumers of it.
I want to hear, by the way, from Beverly, but let me just say, I totally agree with you, because one of the things that I'm saying actually is if what I consider the badly delivered layer of general education can be done with AI, then the last 2 years or last 3 years of university are 100% human. 100%.
Okay, we agree about that.
Yes,
Those the human years.
Oh, absolutely.
Great.
Beverly?
I think that's a perfect segue. Thank you from both of you. I teach medical students, and because of the volume of information that clinicians need to know, there's a real temptation for them to try to suck information from their various search engines. And there's a real danger there, because what they have not yet learned to do, and I teach a lot of first years, is they have not learned to process information and consolidate it. So all they're doing is getting this fire hose of stuff that they have not learned to vet, as Tom was saying. Mm-hmm. And so it's literally information literacy, not information accumulation, but how do you qualify that information? How do you know it is accurate? I spent 2 hours earlier today listening to workshops from the AAMC, the American Association for Medical Colleges, on the use of AI in medical education. And one of the points that was made with examples was that some AI search engines, regardless of how good the prompt is, come up with references that are either unreliable or fake, literally fake. They're not real. And students don't yet know how to do that. I have students who already do not know how to properly cite literature, which that's a whole different concern.
I actually agree with that about especially provenance and genealogy. Yeah, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, you were doing a great job. I just was like thumbs up, because if they don't understand provenance or genealogy, where did the ideas come from? Like, how do you follow that trail? That's something AI cannot do.
And I'm caught in the middle, because I have to help them learn how to use these technologies reasonably, because they are coming to medical technology. There are already AIs being taught to read X-rays and mammograms, and they really need to know when is it appropriate to take that information and when is it appropriate for a human to step in. So this is a really important topic. Thank you so much.
I love the expression information literacy. Like, how good is that? We're talking about information literacy for these kids in the humanities, medical diagnosis, where it's like lives depend on it. It's really, really important. Jenny and Mark, you both have your hands up.
Hi. This conversation is great, really interesting. I'm an instructional designer, and I got into it over 20 years ago when online education was a new thing. And I would tell people we're creating online courses, and people would look at me like, how would that ever work? How would you ever teach something online? And we found that, it's very challenging, because one of the central parts of learning is the relationship the student has with the teacher. And overall, online, from my understanding of the studies I've read, online education from different modalities that do not, if it doesn't include a live element, it's just taught online, there's about a 60% dropout rate. About 40% of people complete them. At least this is true of courses that teach adults. And the so the challenge was always how to get people motivated. And one of the things we used to talk about was that children are motivated to learn and adults aren't unless they're interested in something themselves. But it's really hard to get an adult interested in a topic that they're not inherently interested in to learn. And so I'm being long-winded here. So I feel like when I use AI now, there are two ways I use it. And one is to augment my learning. So like I love to read. So if I read a complex book, then I'll maybe use AI to go deeper with it, like to read arguments about it or different viewpoints about it, something like that. I wouldn't use it to do the book for me. Um, and then there are other times I use it to make a task simpler that I don't want to do. So there's kind of two different uses of it. And what concerns me is it seems like students now in large numbers are using AI to do the work for them because they've lost that motivation to learn. And I see this like when I was in college a long time ago, we loved learning. And it's sort of and I know that there are plenty of students who still do, but there's so many, it seems like they're going to college because they think they should or they have to. And so I know AI isn't going to go away. So my question is, it could be a great tool for people who are internally motivated to learn. And the AI could be very helpful. And if they're not, they're going to use AI in ways that aren't good. So how do we have a conversation about motivating young people again to learn? Because it seems to me that is a key part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I want to add a note here before we get, because I really, really want to touch upon the question of cheating during this conversation. And I think this would plug in really well here. Because when will you start cheating? When you don't actually want to learn the thing, you're not motivated, you're not being made interested in something, and you just want a quick way out. Parentheses closed. Anastasia.
I do. So I think Mark's point is a very good one, and a very important one. And I definitely think we should remember that, because one thing that's very hard to generate is kind of motivation in AI setting. It's not impossible. I think locally it can happen when we're talking about the kind of sustained interest over time without at least like a robust framework around it. That's hard. But I want to actually make kind of to push back just to this extent. I think it's very hard to look at our students to get the numbers that we're hearing, which is, I mean, I had a large gen ed course of 220 students, of which I know for a fact 50% used AI on their final assignment. It was absolutely forbidden. It was a take-home final exam, and they sort of cheated. It's very easy, I think, to then think about the possibility of giving them more motivation, talking to them, for instance, about how much they lose when they outsource their learning to the AI, i.e., learn nothing. But I also think that we have to take seriously as what I've been kind of referring to as that structure of incentives. So even a student who is very motivated, even finds the information interesting, and this is from my own experience as well. Two things we have to remember are as follows. The use of AI will often guarantee a better grade. Certainly in an environment where the university is not committed to the persecution of AI use, which is incredibly hard, because actually doing something about 100 students that cheat in your class would have been a full-time job for me. And in that environment, what we're doing is really incentivizing our students just by virtue of that to use the AI to get that better grade. But secondly, I have seen this, and this was really heartbreaking. I started confronting the students when this happened, and they had various responses, some of them more noble than others. But one of the students, I asked them, "Do you know what plagiarism is?" Said yes. I said, "Have you plagiarized?" They went, "Yes." And I said, "I recognize you from lecture. You're one of the ones who were coming. Why? You know this was nonsense. You knew this was false." It was a very clear case of my questions accidentally revealed the use of AI. They just gave completely hallucinatory answers. And he said, "I know it was false. It didn't look right, but I trusted the technology." So I think we have to remember that we have an incentive structure where they're going to get better rewarded if they feel or they fear they will be better rewarded if they use AI. They trust it over their own judgment. And even the student who uses that free time not to scroll TikTok, not to go to a party, but just to take another class, to take another internship, because they are, like Hollis is saying, not necessarily coming from privilege. They're coming because they did do a 2-year community college before they came to UCI. They really want to do well after, and they're thinking, I could get the same grade or better at a fraction of the time. That even though I love this class and it's fascinating to me, let's say they got to that point. It's very hard if this is your structure of incentives, but they got to that point. They love it. They're still thinking, I can't afford to try and write out this essay myself, get a worse grade, waste way more time. And for what? So, the motivation is huge, and talking to them about ethics could work, but I'm really worried about the kind of both moralizing and this kind of a bit of a fantastical kind of thought that if we just motivate it enough, we just show them that it's interesting enough, we just show them it's really in their best interest to do the work on their own, it's going to be sufficient. And that's why I think the university has to take a really strong stance. I love this, both giving them information literacy, but it's also, actively protecting students from all these effects that we all agree on are detrimental to their education.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Absolutely. I mean, as you're describing this story of this young student, I think everybody was nodding, like we feel this. And the thought that somebody would trust something that's hallucinating back to it over their own judgment, even the smartest students, is just a very, very negative spiral. Ben, you're the last question, just to respect the time, and then I will have a little outro question for our debaters.
Okay, so yeah, I've just had a lot of thoughts throughout this whole conversation, just typing out a lot of things, and I didn't share them because, I mean, how does it all fit together? And I mean, how it fits together is like, I was a university student. I studied electrical and software engineering, and I was a grad student. I left because, I just realized slowly over time that education as an institution, it's broken. It's broken in so many ways. It's like I was learning most of those concepts just online, reading the book or investigating my own curiosities in the chain of logic or reason like that I wanted to go down, and like having tools to do that is helpful. But like with AI, the reason that people use it, I would guess, is because like education, it gives you a number from 0 to 4 and labels you with it your entire time, like in getting some degree. And then, during that time, it's like you failed. Like I'm thinking of like my dad as an example. It's like he got was the only one out of 1,000 cadets at West Point to get a perfect score on his thermodynamics exam. But because of an earlier test, he still got a B+ in the class, even though he was the best one there on that test. So it's like, and I had a similar experience in the combinatorics class. So it's like at that point, like, what does it matter? It feels more like a performance, and you're performing, and that's what AI does. It performs. It doesn't feel. It doesn't experience. It's not immersed. And I said this in the comments earlier, but like that's education. It's immersion. Like if you or I or anyone else tried to learn a foreign language, and we went and took traditional courses in it, we're not going to learn shit. Like, no offense, but like it comes from just like when you're a baby or a toddler, you learn that because you have to. That's like the only way. There's no escaping. There's no like going like to a bar, to a library. You're just like going back to like your native language, unless you want to cry for like into adulthood, which I mean, I guess some people do that in a manner of speaking. But
so what's the question? What's the question?
I mean, I guess it's not,
don't tease us.
It's not
Tell
as much of a
question.
question as just just a general sentiment of like,
okay.
We're debating these issues because of the institution of education. It's degrading, and whether AI has a place in it depends on what the institution is actually standing for. Because if it's just a performance, then I don't see why people wouldn't be better served just it's like it's all about mindset. It's all about whether you want to be immersed, because if you don't, then you're just you're not going to take it seriously, and it's just going to be stressful about getting a job, getting that cushy spot you want at some prestigious company, which at my school, Georgia Tech, that was it's all about that. Like everyone is hyper competitive. Like everyone's got like high test scores and all these accolades, and like research from high school or whatever. Like, and that destroys the desire to learn when you're constantly compared and you're told, well, fail at all of these times. And that's what learning is about, but it's going to be held against you the entire time. So do as I say, not as I do. That's the issue that I have with it.
Thank you so much. I
It's
think
really
this is the
personal
one
to
thing
me.
we agree on. I think that communality and immersion are not replaceable. And then the matter remains open, and I will get back to that in a moment. I think Anastasia and then Hollis, you raise your hands. You don't have to. Thank you so much, Ben. What a good outro question.
Thank you, Ben, because I think it gives me a chance to share a little story by way of conclusion. So now Hollis has really helpfully, I think, concretized our topic of discussion. It's not generally AI, it's really asking kind of a fundamental question about general education. I think, all actually agree, perhaps, that problems of general education are broader and wider, and there's a question of whether or not we can address them. But I want to tell something about the general education class that I taught. It's a really large class. As I said, there were 220 students in it. And one of the students there, I think should be comfortable with me sharing this kind of general outline. She is a Chinese student who arrived here. She's from an English-speaking school, is a very kind of particular background where there were a lot of kind of college advising, paid college advising to make sure she gets into a US school. She was on her way to study something in STEM, and she found herself in this gen ed class that happened to be there because she had to. During the year, she had transferred to the University of Chicago, where she will now proceed to take philosophy classes. And now she talks to me about which philosophy classes she should take. This is where I went to graduate school. And it is, yeah, Anna's like, and it is actually incredibly moving. Is it sad that perhaps my most kind of interesting and engaged student left? Yes. Yes, I don't enjoy this part. But I was very happy for her, and I was happy. I don't want to take more credit than is due, but I was very happy to be able to be there for her, to awaken a little bit more interest, to keep that soul interested and vibrant for a little bit longer. She is more likely to become kind of our colleague at an Interintellect salon. She is more likely to take on the world and the information and its political and moral upheavals a little bit more thoughtfully. I think both because she took that course and because of the education that she will now continue pursuing because she took that course. This was a gen ed class. I'm at UCI, which is a kind of like a good public university, but a lot of our students are coming from community schools, community colleges. Would she have been able to have that trajectory if more of her education was her sitting in front of that computer, suffering from what Ben is describing when he's talking about that institutionalization, what Mark is describing when he's talking about the lack of motivation of sitting alone in a dark room? We know what the pandemic felt like for students having to sit alone, isolated with their laptops. When we're talking about the kind of outsourcing and skill decay that Beverly was talking about. I think even Wesley was on board to sufficient degree here, without being able to understand what information is coming in or not. Like Tom, I don't know, and I don't think so. And so we have to also remember when we're talking about this very broad education, it's very easy to talk about these unwilling students, and they're not as good, and they're not as self-motivated as I was, and they're not. But among them are the people who are going to end up coming to these salons. And I think it's one of those costs, in addition to rendering kind of the mass of them subcognitive, is to not giving them that chance to develop into the people that they could have developed.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I mean, this would be the point of it, right? That's why we do general education. But do you have to correct 270 papers?
So UCI has, the system is like, in any situation like this, is that once you reach a certain size of a class, Hollis was kind of implicitly touching upon that, you do get TAs. If my class were smaller, which it may become as they start finding out you can't use AI in my classes, but if the class were smaller, until a certain number, you grade yourself, and above a certain number, then you have TAs. But I want to say something about grading. I mean, even at this was also the case at other universities. Professors, I think I was listening to Hollis, who was talking about, professors have to figure out what it is that they can do, and that could be labor intensive. But grading is not fun.
I mean, there's a new piece on Substack about
That's all
TAs
right.
using. I mean, the TAs are using ChatGPT to
Yeah,
grade
they're all doing
papers.
it. So,
So
well,
basically, the AI
all good.
the AI written text is being graded by another AI.
So which again, I think it's really important to hear that, appreciate the dystopian horror of it, but also be careful about the moralizing, because I can tell you one thing, and I saw this with my TAs. There it is a unique humiliation to have to be reading dozens upon dozens of AI like slop hell papers. And not only is that, so that's incredibly demoralizing, and it actually renders, it has done this to me very quickly. It makes you a very paranoid and unhappy um reader. So I'm now in a place where I can't read I read papers and I'm not sure if I'm talking to a human. It's incredible. So when we talk about the AIs then letting, sorry, the TAs letting the AIs do the grading, they shouldn't. But I also understand it, and it's not just because they're lazy.
No,
So
it was not a comment on their laziness. It's just
yeah.
the absurdity of it. Hollis, yours is the kind of closing
No, no,
remark
that's
over here.
great. I mean, I think in ways, we've been talking about what we disagree with more than we agree with, just because that's going to make things lively and fun. But again, to step back and look at higher education, and Benjamin, I mean, I totally agree with, your frustrations and all the things that you've seen and all of us have been saying, right? The percent of time when a college student is the percent of time of a college student's like day, week, semester, whatever, that is devoted to instruction versus all of the other things that the modern university does, or the number of, it's counseling, it's RAs, it's dorms, it's career services, it's, all of this entire, penumbra of services to ensure the experience is like all of this stuff. Like it's a tiny percentage that is actually, that the university's resources are devoted to instruction, right? And let's just start there as a really depressing fact that as a teacher, that I have to deal with, right? Because the students will see so many other people that are employees of the universities, of bureaucrats of some sort of assistant deans and student affairs and all of these things, right? So the instruction to me really is important, and it should be a greater percent of what we do. I actually, the ideal is everything that you're saying, Anastasia. It is small classes, small seminars, human interaction, no AI, none of that. All of the things that really, really matter. And I don't mean this is just the human touch in AI. I mean, this is real engagement, intellectual, human to human, expert to non-expert. And this is part of the question, right? And this is the story that you told about your student that went on. She recognized you as an expert, that you were bringing real expertise to your field. And that interaction, don't shake your head, right? You are an expert. You are a person who knows what you know. You have done these years of study. The reasons I was been focusing on Gen Ed is that a lot of the Gen Ed layer is not experts, are people that in fact, it's a different kind of layer here. And what I'd like to do is, if that is done that way, then the students, once you get to that human interaction with a true expert in a field, whatever that field has to be, that is going to be so much more valuable in contrast to everything else. And so that is my pitch to say where we actually agree.
I think that's a really, really good summary. We will use AI to summarize the salon. No, it's not going to happen. We will use a human editor to help us create beautiful videos out of this. Thank you so much, Anastasia and Hollis, for joining us. I think this was one of the most interesting salons ever seen on our platform. And I appreciate all the excellent questions, even people who just participate in the chat, one of the liveliest Zoom chats of any salon ever. I think there's a lot to this, and I would love to do this conversation again in a year. Because if we compare it to 1 year ago, I mean, compare today to 1 year ago, it's like an eon has happened since then. We can look at some of our predictions. I'm so curious whether we were more or less hopeful in a year. And maybe we will see longer student arcs subjected to this technology, because now we're really only seeing maybe half a year, one semester to see a full academic year. And maybe we will come to the conclusion that, as with other sources of entertainment and ease in life, people are immunizing themselves a little bit against things that are too easy or too good, right? I mean, when I was a kid, everybody went to McDonald's. Now, not so much. Everybody wants to be Brian Johnson. So people are trying to fight their own temptations, is what I'm trying to say. And if this is so tempting, maybe people will, with the right help and the right motivation, develop some kind of immunity and really use this tool for what it can help with and where it can make us smarter. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And all the attendees, I mean, Wes, another expert showing up. What a treat. And Jen was here. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's hope for the best and do our best work.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Always happy to do it. Take care, guys.